Okay, so here we are with video number 2 of the series where we're talking about Google Earth and its application for farmers and land managers of all shapes and sizes. My name is Steve Gabriel, and I'm going to walk you through the different pieces of using Google Earth, and this video is going to focus on the tools you can use within Google Earth to draw, add pictures, and put pins and polygons and lines into your map and some of the applications of that. So we've talked about in the first video sort of some of the basic navigation, and I think just being able to navigate and look at some of your aerial photography can be really useful in your farm planning or your land planning. So what we're going to do is look at our landscape here and show some examples of how we can add other layers to our map as we go and use it for some planning tools. So we'll start a new folder. I've talked in the previous video about the importance of folders and organization in here, so we're going to start a new folder. And I just right click and say add folder, and what happens is a dialog box comes up here and I can name this folder. This dialog box will come up for all the things that we're going to add, and so it's useful getting familiar with this. Sometimes it shows up on weird parts of your screen. You might have to drag it into the center of your screen in order to see it. So we're going to call this our demo for video folder, and if I add that, then I can click on OK. And we've added that to my places. And as I mentioned, it's always good to go up to save my places, just to make sure it doesn't get lost if I close the program or if it crashes by accident or something like that. So looking at our landscape here, there's a couple things we can add, and I mentioned before that as we move our cursor around, we get information about latitude and longitude. If we turn on the terrain layer, it basically adds data to our map that allows us to also see elevation data. So again, if I want to learn about this part of my farm, I can see that here's a latitude longitude associated with where I've put the hand, and it says it's at 1,444 feet elevation. And as I move around, that's going to change depending on where I am on the farm. Okay. And once I turn that terrain off, then I don't see the elevation data anymore. And we're going to keep that off for now and go back to the sort of starting point of our farm. So let's look at a certain field here. Let's say I want to label some things or draw on my map. I want to first highlight the folder. I don't want to put it into my home folder. What I want to do is put it into this demo folder for you all. So I've clicked on that and highlighted that. Now if I go up to this push pin, that's going to allow me to add a point. And again, a point is just going to be somewhere on the map that has an associated longitude and latitude. So let's map this little shack here in the field. So we're going to, we have our point here. When you add it, it automatically gives you a label that you need to do, and it again, a dialog box will pop up. I'm going to call this the old farm shack. Okay, I can change the look of my pin. If I click on the pin itself, and then maybe I want to make it this blue, I can change the color of it to something else. I can change the scale. If we move this aside, you can see it's quite large. Maybe I want to make it a little bit smaller. And then I can say OK. And we have our old farm shack. And I can also change the size of the label here. So if I go in this dialog box, here's description. I can write this is an old farm shack, needs to be taken down. I can add notes in that, okay? And then I can also change the icon from this point. Maybe I actually want to make it a lighter blue. Maybe I want to make it a little bigger. And I can also make the text larger and smaller, okay? And when I'm done, I can say OK. And now I have that, and you can see it's in my folder. I can turn it off as a layer. I can also turn off the whole folder, and it'll turn that off. Anything nested under a folder, if you click on the folder checkbox, it'll turn it off, right? And so now as I look at it, if I click on it, it's actually going to have a little dialog box, and it says my notes that I put in the description. And anytime I want to change that, I can just go over to the list, and I can right click and go to Get Info, and that dialog box will pop back up, and I can make my changes. All right, so that's a point. So that point has one latitude and longitude associated with it. Next, we're going to go up to the line feature up here. And so this is just simply where we are taking and they call it a path in here. We're just taking a series of points and connecting them with a line. So let's say I want to draw a fence line on this edge of the field. All I need to do is click where I want to draw that line. Okay, and I have that there. I can say this is the north fence for this field. I'll call it that. Notice it doesn't have an icon. Only points will have the label visible with it, but it does have that, and so I can reference it later and know what this line is referencing. If I go to style and color again, I can change the color. Maybe I want to make it a nice red, and maybe I want to make that line a bit thicker just so it's easy to see. So I'm going to go up to 3 here, and I say OK. It's in that folder. Again, I can turn one of these on and off separately, or if I turn off the folder, then it'll turn everything off. Okay. And then again, if I want to change it, I can go to Get Info. One nice thing about in this dialog box is you can look at the measurements, and you can actually learn the length of that line. So now I know that that fence line is 398 feet, which is really nice. All right. And then I can draw a polygon. So let's say I'm doing a design for my farm and I want to draw a raised bed or a field bed or a paddock for my livestock. Well, the polygon feature up here is basically a series of dots connected that form a shape, that fill in the space essentially. So let's say that I'm going to set up a paddock over just in this side of the field. Okay, so I add my points. I'm going to say this is the sheep paddock. Okay, I can change the style and color, and with polygons you can choose if you want to have it outlined with a line and filled, or just outlined, or just filled. And for this case I'm going to do filled and outline just to show you that. The lines I can choose, the outline is, maybe I'll choose a purple just for fun. And I'm going to make that nice and thick. And oops, I'm going to go back in, right click, and I'm going to change the interior, make that a yellow just for fun. So now my area is yellow, and I can actually change the opacity. So if I want to see what's underneath it, I just change it to 50%, and now I have my sheep paddock, right? And again, if I click on it, because I haven't entered any information, it's not going to do anything, but if I entered information, sheep paddock for winter, then when I click on it, it'll actually give me that information. Okay, and again, I can go in and right click and get info, and when that dialog pops up, I can actually look at the measurements. So it'll tell me both the perimeter, which is 813 feet, as well as the area. If I want to do it in acres, it's about 0.81 acres. If I want to do it in square feet, 35,000 square feet, that kind of thing. So it's really nice that you can draw these things and then get that information. You think about all sorts of applications, things we want to measure on the farm, that we can now measure with Google Earth and get a pretty accurate representation. And I'll show some examples in the 4th video of how we've used that tool to plan out different aspects of our farm. Okay, so we have points, we have lines, we have polygons. Okay, those are the 3 main things you can do. Other things we can do in here is, without drawing something, we can actually just measure things. There's a measure tool up here. So here's just a different way of looking at this. So we have a couple things. We can measure a line, which is just 2 different points and a straight line in between them. Let's say I wanted to run a water line. So it'll tell me the distance from A to B here, 232 feet. And if I want to save that to my folder, as long as I've selected my folder, I can actually save that line. Let's say that's a water line. So when I do that, it'll pop up that dialog box, and I can say, cool, I want to put a water line in there, and now I'm going to save that. So that's a way to work off measurements and then add something to your folders. And actually what it'll do is put it in your temporary places, and you'll need to move it up to your folder to save it. Okay, let's open up that measure box again. You can of course do a path, which is just not 2 points but multiple points if I wanted to draw that. When I'm using the measuring tool, anytime I don't want to save something, I can just clear it and start over again. Maybe I want to do a polygon. Maybe I want to do a circle. This is really nice when you are looking at something that needs a radius. So I can start at the old farm shack. Let's say I want to know approximately anything that's 50 feet from that shack. Well, here I can draw this circle, and now I have that saved, and that's the radius. That's 50 feet from the center here of this, where this shack is located. So I could save that, or I could simply clear it if I'm not interested in keeping that information. So if you know what you want to draw, you can measure that if you don't know what you want to draw, you just want to do measurements, then you can use this measurement tool that's up at the top of the toolbox here. Alright, and then finally, one more drawing that we can do. We're going to zoom out a little bit here. And let's turn off these layers. Again, if you organize things really well, it's nice because you can just unclick things and clean up your map. Let's say I want to add the boundaries for my farm. And it used to be that you could get boundary data right through Google Earth. They unfortunately removed that feature, so we have to do it a bit more manually. And this, along with other things, is sometimes where it's useful to use the image overlay feature, which you can find up here next to the other ones that we've talked about. So if we click on that, it'll put this little green box in here and it'll ask us to find an image. This is in this case we're going to look for property boundaries. So I have my survey map. So I'm going to put that in the name. It's always good to name things first. And then I'm going to browse on my computer, and I've saved it, the survey map, to my desktop. So I'm going to open up a JPEG. And now it's plopped it in there, which is pretty cool. Now if I'm going to move this dialog box out of the way, because I'm still editing it, so it's going to be open, but I want to see what's going on here. And what's really useful when you're using an image overlay is to see, obviously, your map underneath. And so I'm going to make it nice and opaque, or nice and clear, I should say. I'm going to take it down to about 50%. And then I can kind of make out the pond here on the survey map. I can make out some of the roads, and it takes a bit of finessing, but what's nice about this feature is you can actually, if you grab onto that little diamond, you can toggle your image and line it up. So we're going to make this basically north-south. And then if you hold shift and mess with the corners, you can size this map. And so what I'm trying to do is basically line up the map that I've imported with, and if I click on the center, I can move it. I'm going to line it up with that pond. So you can see I've outlined this pond here with the pond on the screen, and I'm going to try to line up our road. Here's our driveway a bit. So this takes a bit of practice, but it gives you a decent way to kind of put your boundaries on the map that's relatively accurate here. And then I got to line up my main road here, so I'm going to drag this out. All right, and it's not perfect, but it'll do. It's kind of like stretching an image on anything else on your computer. Okay, so I'm happy with that. I'm going to say OK with my survey map. Now it's added it to my folder here, so again I can toggle it on and off. But now I have all this information, and what I want to do is trace my boundary lines. And so if I take the Polygon feature, it opens up, and then I'm just going to trace. This is the neighbor's land that we rent from, so I'm going to trace their boundary first. And I'm using the Polygon because it gives us a closed shape, and I don't necessarily want it filled in, but I can just change that in my settings. So I'm just marking where their pins are. Okay, so there's their boundary, and I'm going to change it so it's just outlined. Okay, and I'm going to save that as our neighbor's land. Okay, so that's added. Oops, spelled it wrong. Can always go back and edit. Alright, and then I'm going to add in our land from the survey here with another polygon. So we'll just start at the corner here, and we'll trace our boundaries around. And actually it's off this map, but I know it goes straight to the road. So here's our land. Now we probably want to see a little bit of a difference in color just to differentiate it, so I'm just going to change that in the dialog. I'm going to change the line to a different color. There's red, and I'm going to say this is our boundaries. Okay, and now I have those on the map. And so now when I turn off the survey map, I can actually just see a nice representation of our boundaries. And it's not always perfect. You can see here what I traced on the map is not exactly what's on here. So I might go back into our neighbor's land. And if you just simply drag these corners, you can kind of reshape. So I just want to move the driveway easement to more accurately reflect what's in the image. So we'll just kind of do that. And that's pretty good. And it's good enough for our design purposes. It's not perfect again, but it's pretty good. So there you go. So now we have points, we got lines, we got polygons, we covered the measure tool, and we've overlaid an image and drawn our boundaries.